Okay, now we're going to look at the chapter on plant reproduction. It's a long chapter, so we're going to divide it up over 4 videos. This is the syllabus details of what we need to learn. So it's over 2 pages, and we're just going to concentrate what's on these 3 sections here. We're looking at the structure of the flower, we're looking at how pollen grain are formed and how the embryo sac forms. And we'll do another video for the next section. Okay, this is the first part. So a definition for sexual reproduction is involving 2 parents. So say 2 parents, don't say 2 plants or 2 animals, say 2 parents. Much better definition would be the union of 2 haploid gametes to form a diploid zygote. You should take down and learn that definition. Remember that haploid means a single set of chromosomes, and diploid means 2 sets of chromosomes. You need to be able to draw a diagram of a plant, of a flower, and label the parts sepal, petal, stamen, and carpel. So you might draw a line diagram of this structure. So starting from the bottom, we have the stem, which supports the flower. The swollen top of the stem is called a receptacle. The petal is on the outside, brightly colored to attract insects for pollination. The male structures are called stamen, and they consist of an anther and a filament. The female structure is called a carpel, and it consists of a stigma, a style, and an ovary. Inside the ovary, this is the ovary here, inside the ovary is 1 or more ovules. Some carpels would have 1 ovule inside the ovary, others have many ovules inside the ovary. So be able to draw a diagram like that. These are the kind of diagrams that Leaving Cert asks at ordinary level. So you can maybe draw this diagram instead. From the outside, we have C is the petal, B is the anther, and A is the ovary. So you have the stigma, the style, and the ovary. The sepals here protect the flower as a bud. This is a different type of flower. A, petal, B, anther, C, filament. D is actually the receptacle. It's the swollen top of the stem. E is the sepal, protecting the flower as a bud. And F is pointing to the little carpels. So each of those here is a carpel, and each one has a stigma, a style, and an ovary. Now this table summarizes what we've just said. So if you want to pause the video again and take this down. Okay, the parts are: the sepal protects the flower as a bud. The petal attracts animals for pollination, attracts insects for pollination. The stamen produces pollen grain, and the pollen grain carry the male gamete, the male sex cell. And the carpel is a female structure, has a stigma, style, and ovary, and the ovary contains ovules, and the ovules are the structures that produce the female gamete. Okay, now we need to look at the formation of the male gamete, the pollen grain in a bit more detail. What's in bold here is specifically for higher level. So starting at the beginning, this is the anther, and inside the anther we have small cells called microspore mother cells. These are inside pollen chambers. The tapetum is a nourishing layer of cells on the outside. So we have microspore mother cells in here. Micro means small, so these are quite small cells. Each of these divides by meiosis to produce 4 haploid daughter cells. So there's 4 cells here, all clumped together. There's 3 in the front and 1 behind. And a clump of 4 cells like this is called a tetrad. So Tetrad. You could add that label here if you wish. So we're starting with diploid microspore mother cells divided by meiosis to form 4 haploid cells. These cells simply separate to produce 4 separate pollen grains. A further mitosis division this time divides the nucleus into a tube cell nucleus and a generative nucleus. And another mitosis divides the generative nucleus into 2 male gametes. So we have meiosis here, mitosis, and then another mitosis for the generative nucleus. And that produces a cell that has 3 nuclei, so the tube nucleus and 2 male gametes. The outer layer of cells forms the exine, and that can be spiky to attach to an insect's body for pollination. Now we're looking at how the female egg develops. Okay, we have a structure called the embryo sac, which is the female equivalent of the pollen grain. The embryo sac produces an egg cell and what are called polar nuclei. We'll see those in a while. All of the information in bold is specifically for higher level. Okay, we're going to start at the beginning, inside the ovary. So the stigma in the ovary. Inside the ovary, we have structures called ovules. Each ovule contains a diploid megaspore cell. Mega means big, so these are quite big cells in comparison to the microspore of the pollen grain. So we're starting with a diploid megaspore cell. The megaspore cell divides by meiosis, and that produces 4 daughter cells, 4 haploid nuclei. 3 of these break down, so only one of them survives. So one of these nucleus survives and divides by mitosis 3 times to produce an embryo sac with 8 nuclei. So the structure at the end is called an embryo sac. It's the equivalent of the pollen grain. The pollen grain had 3 nuclei. The embryo sac has 8 nuclei. And finally, cells surrounding the embryo sac form the integuments. Just to go back over that again, we're starting with a megaspore mother cell. It's diploid. It divides by meiosis to produce 4 haploid cells. 3 of them break down. So this is the disintegration word up here. One of them survives and continues to develop. It divides by mitosis once to produce 2 nuclei, divides by mitosis again to produce 4 nuclei, divides by mitosis again to produce a cell with 8 nuclei. This cell here with 8 nuclei is called the embryo sac. The 2 nuclei in the middle are called polar nuclei, and the middle nucleus on the bottom is the egg nucleus. So there are actually 3 gametes here, an egg nucleus and 2 polar nuclei. Just to recap on that, this is what we are left with. We have a pollen grain, we have an exine, tough outer coat, an intine, and then we have 2 nuclei here, the generative nucleus and the tube nucleus, and the generative nucleus will shortly divide into 2 male gametes. And the female, so this structure here is the carpel, the stigma, style, and ovary. Inside the ovary, we have an ovule, and inside the ovule is where we have the embryo sac. So this large structure here with 8 nuclei inside is called the embryo sac. The important nuclei are the 2 in the center, which are called the polar nuclei. And the middle one on the bottom is the egg cell. So the arrow here could refer to the middle one on the bottom, which is the egg cell. So the 2 polar nuclei and the egg cell, they're all identical to each other. They're all produced by mitosis. They're referred to as the female gametes. We have a layer of cells develops around the embryo sac called the integuments. The integuments are there for protection. Also in the diagram here, we have the nucellus, which is a layer of cells that provide nourishment for the developing embryo sac. I'd like you to watch 2 YouTube videos to go back over that. So they're both produced by biology bugbears. One is pollen grain formation, and the other is female gamete formation.